I think we can all agree that Red Dead Redemption 2 has one of the best video game stories of all time, exploring the destruction of the Van der Linde gang and Arthur Morgan's road to redemption when faced with death. The story of Red Dead 2 is split into 6 chapters and a 2-part epilogue, each with a change of scenery and tone. I'm going to be ranking the chapters from worst to best, based on location, missions, and overall enjoyment. As always, there are heavy spoilers for Red Dead Redemption 2 ahead. So I think that chapter 1 is the weakest chapter in the game. It starts out just after the boat robbery in Blackwater and finishes with the gang going down the mountain and heading east. Chapter 1 is by far the shortest chapter in the game at only 6 missions long. The snowy environment gets old quick, and the lack of open world makes it a bit boring to sit through. I mean, it is the tutorial portion of the game, so a slower pace is to be expected, but I know people that give up on the game in this chapter because of it. Chapter 1 does have some fun missions though, like raiding the O'Driscoll base and the train robbery. The worst mission in this chapter I think is where Arthur and Javier go and rescue John. It drags on for far too long. In isolation, chapter 1 is fine, but there's just no way I can put it above the other chapters. At number 6 we have chapter 5, which is also relatively short at 10 missions. When the bank robbery in Saint Denis goes wrong, the gang get on the boat to escape the law and end up on the island of Guarma. This section just feels out of place and like a different game entirely. While Guarma is a weaker part of the game, there are some missions towards the end that are just so over the top and fun to play, like blowing up the warship and rescuing the ship captain to escape the island. We also have to remember that chapter 5 isn't entirely Guarma either. When the gang returns to the main map, all the missions are really good, like the all-out fight between the gang and the Pinkertons in Le Gras, the hot air balloon mission, and Arthur and Charles going to clear out Beaver Hollow. All these missions help chapter 5 stay above chapter 1 and put it in the number 6 spot.
So how did you know she was gonna betray us? What'd she say?
It was in her eyes, in the way she was leading us.
But you said you knew Spanish.
I know human beings, Arthur.
At number 5 I've got the epilogue, and I've combined both parts into one entry because there is almost nothing to the first part. The 2 parts together are a total of 21 missions long, 10 in part 1 and 11 in part 2, although a handful of missions tend to go for 5 minutes or less, so it's not as long as it sounds. The epilogue of Red Dead 2 takes place 7 years after the events of the main story, and we take control of John after Arthur has moved on. If you thought the map during the main story was big enough, the epilogue opens the map of Red Dead 1, introducing a bunch of new animals to track down and hunt, and the towns of Blackwater, Tumbleweed and Armadillo to explore. It also gives us 2 gangs, the Del Lobos and the Skinner brothers, to face off against. The first part of the epilogue has John attempting to put his pride aside and his gunslinger lifestyle behind him, to learn how to become a rancher and provide Abigail with the life she's always wanted. The best mission in this part would be dealing with the Laramie boys. The epilogue gets a lot better in the second part, where John reconnects with Uncle and Charles and they help him build his house. John getting revenge on Michael is a strong ending to the game, and it sets up the events of Red Dead 1 well. At number 4 is chapter 4, and this is where things start to really go wrong for the gang. This chapter starts with the gang moving into the Shady Belle camp and trying to find Jack in Saint Denis. This chapter is 11 missions long and mainly takes place in the bottom right section of the map. I don't like the swamp environment as much as some of the other locations in the game, especially because of the alligators around every corner and the night folk that'll hunt you down quickly if you don't react fast enough. This chapter's main city is Saint Denis. It's impressive with lots to do, but one wrong step and you're going to have the entire city's lore on you in 5 seconds. Chapter 4 has some really fun missions, like the fight between the gang and the O'Driscolls at Shady Belle, robbing the trolley station, and feeding Angelo Bronte to an alligator. It also has some of the most unique settings for missions, like the mayor's mansion and the poker game on the boat.
And how exactly are we getting out of here?
Probably involve us dressing up as dancing girls and carrying cannon off the side.
The chapter ends with the shocking Saint Denis bank robbery. Losing both Hosea and Lenny was a big blow for the gang that they were never able to recover from. At number 3 is the final chapter of the main story, chapter 6, where everything is just falling apart for the gang. Many members have either died or left, and Micah has just completely manipulated Dutch. The members who remain unofficially choose sides and are at each other's throats.
Should've let him die and warm him. Little sack of shit.
This chapter is 15 missions long and it starts with Arthur and Sadie breaking John out of jail. Most of this chapter is about tying up loose ends that have piled up throughout the game, like dealing with Leviticus Cornwall and Como Driscoll. Dutch is also determined to increase the already high tensions between the US Army and the Native Americans, so that the gang can disappear quickly. This leads to some great missions too, like breaking eagle flies out of Fort Wallace and raiding the Heartland oil fields. Much of this chapter takes place in the top right area of the map, with the closest towns being Annesburg and the Van Horn trading post, both small towns with not much going on. This chapter is also when most of the best optional missions become available, like money lending and other sins parts 6 and 7, archaeology for beginners, and do not seek absolution.
I'm sorry, man. I really am.
The main gang you'll be dealing with in this chapter is the Murphy Brood, which are up there with the Skinner brothers as the most dangerous gang in the game. This chapter ends with Arthur and Sadie rescuing Abigail from the Pinkertons, and Arthur confronting Dutch and Micah. Players get to decide how Arthur's story ends, either by helping John escape or going back for the money. In terms of story, this chapter is one of the best, and that's the main reason why it's in the number 3 spot. It's just sad to see the state in which the gang ended up.
I gave you all I had. I did.
And number 2 is chapter 2. After a slow chapter 1, players are finally able to explore all that the open world has to offer. Chapter 2 is the longest in the game with a total of 17 missions. After descending the mountain, the gang makes camp at Horseshoe Overlook, which is one of the better camps because of its central location. Valentine is also close by and is one of the most prominent towns in the game. I get so much enjoyment out of this chapter because I just love how happy everyone is. Even though things haven't gone right for them, the gang remains strong by supporting each other, something they weren't able to do later on.
You know, nothing means more to me than this gang. The bond we share. It's the most real thing to me. I would kill for it, I would happily die for it.
Chapter 2 gives a strong introduction to the gang members, as you complete a mission with nearly everyone at least once. This chapter has so many fun missions, like going to the bar with Lenny, breaking Micah out of jail, and the train robbery. I've found that many players will spend the most amount of time in this chapter. Since most of the game's content becomes available here, you can spend days just exploring and doing all the side missions. It ended up being close between my number 2 and number 1 picks, but a number 1 is chapter 3. This chapter is just really well balanced. It begins right after the Valentine shootout when Charles and Arthur find the gang's new camp at Clemens Point, and the main focus of the chapter is around playing both the Grey and Braithwaite families while in search of gold. There are some nice breaks in between this though, like helping Beau and Penelope, and the bank robbery in Valentine that gives you enough money to last the entire game. This chapter is on the longer side with a total of 16 missions. The gang is still happy and positive in this chapter, and nearly everyone is still likeable. Chapter 3 is associated with the town of Rhodes, which is up there with Valentine as one of the best in the game. We get more character introductions in this chapter, like Sadie, who's been with the gang since the start of chapter 1 but has been grieving her husband's death up to this point. There's also Como Driscoll, who sets up an ambush to kidnap Arthur and has an intense face-off with Dutch. The main rival gang we deal with in this chapter are the Lemoyne Raiders. Although they aren't nearly as dangerous as some of the other gangs, they still have relations with the Braithwaites and occupy Shady Belle. They are also around the map either threatening other people or preparing to ambush you. And I can't talk about chapter 3 without mentioning the assault on Braithwaite Manor. I ranked it as my favourite mission of the game. Everything about it from the music to the dialogue makes it a masterpiece. Overall, there's nothing really bad I can say about chapter 3. It has a bit of everything and is really enjoyable from start to finish, which is why it deserves the number 1 spot.
Hey, I always enjoy riding with you, kid.
So that's how I would rank the chapters from Red Dead Redemption 2. Let me know if you agree and how you would rank the chapters in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please check out some of my other videos on Red Dead 2. Thank you for watching and I'll see you guys next time.